Welcome to the Survival Historian, where we uncover the forgotten survival strategies that kept humanity alive through history's darkest chapters. Today we descend into one of warfare's most unforgiving environments, the trenches of the Western Front during World War I. Imagine living in a waterlogged ditch carved into foreign soil, where the boundary between life and death measured mere yards. For 4 brutal years, millions of men endured conditions that would break the strongest among us today. This is the story of how they survived when survival itself seemed impossible. The trench system, an underground world. The Western Front stretched over 400 miles from the English Channel to the Swiss border, but for the individual soldier, his entire universe contracted to a muddy corridor 7 feet deep and barely wide enough for 2 men to pass. These weren't simple ditches. The trench networks formed elaborate underground cities, complete with 3-tiered systems, front-line trenches facing the enemy, support trenches behind them, and reserve trenches further back, all connected by communication trenches that zigzagged to prevent enemy fire from enfilading entire lines. Men carved dugouts into trench walls, burrowing like animals to create shelter from artillery bombardment. The deeper dugouts, reinforced with timber and sandbags, became precious real estate where exhausted soldiers could, snatch moments of sleep while shells screamed overhead. The architecture of survival meant thinking vertically as well as horizontally, transforming the earth itself into both fortress and home. Battling the elements, mud, water, and exposure became a daily ordeal. The trenches transformed with every season, but honestly, none brought more misery than the rain. The chalky soil of the Somme and the clay of Flanders turned into a glutinous nightmare that, swallowed everything. Water pooled in the bottom of trenches despite constant pumping efforts, creating a perpetual swamp that reached knee-high or even deeper. Soldiers stood in this freezing water for days, their feet swelling and rotting with trench foot, a gangrenous condition that could, if left untreated, actually necessitate amputation. To combat this, men learned to waterproof their boots with whale oil, massaging it into leather each day. They changed socks religiously when supplies allowed, and elevated duckboards, wooden slats, provided precarious pathways above the mire. Officers conducted daily foot inspections, understanding that mobility meant survival. The cold penetrated everything. Soldiers wore layers upon layers, wool uniforms, greatcoats, scarves sent from home, anything to insulate against the bone-deep chill that made men shake uncontrollably during night watches. They learned to keep moving during sentry duty, flexing fingers and toes to maintain circulation, knowing that falling asleep in winter could mean never waking. Beyond enemy bullets, soldiers fought a constant battle against creatures that thrived in the trenches. Rats grew to the size of cats, gorging on corpses in no man's land, and scavenging rations from unwary men. These bloated rodents would crawl over sleeping soldiers' faces, drawn by the warmth and the scent of food. Men hunted them with clubs and bayonets, sometimes organizing competitive rat-killing contests for sport and sanitation. The rats couldn't be eliminated, they bred faster than men could kill them. So soldiers adapted, storing food in sealed tins and sleeping with faces covered. Even more intimate were the lice that infested every uniform, congregating in the seams where body heat was strongest. These parasites caused relentless itching and spread trench fever, a debilitating illness that incapacitated thousands. Soldiers spent precious rest hours chatting, running candle flames along uniform seams to pop the lice eggs, but the vermin always returned. Some men simply accepted the crawling sensation as part of trench life, a discomfort so constant it became normalized. Sustaining life meant finding food and water in the trenches. Hunger gnawed constantly at men whose bodies burned calories fighting cold and stress. Rations arrived nightly through communication trenches carried by supply parties who risked their lives navigating the darkness. The standard British ration included hard biscuits so tough they earned the name toothed dullers, along with canned corned beef, which was derisively called bully beef. Soldiers improvised cooking methods using braziers fashioned from metal cans, carefully managing smoke to avoid drawing enemy fire. They heated water for tea, that quintessentially British comfort, and, occasionally received hot stew from field kitchens behind the lines. The daily rum ration, dispensed at dawn, provided more than warmth. It offered liquid courage before going over the top. Men traded rations, pooled resources, and created surprisingly inventive meals from their meager supplies, transforming survival rations into something approaching normalcy through culinary ingenuity born of necessity. The terror of gas breathing through hell. Few weapons inspired more primal fear than poison gas. The first clouds of chlorine drifted across Ypres in April 1915, turning the air greenish-yellow and leaving men choking, blinded, drowning in their own fluids. Survival meant recognizing the signs instantly: the acrid smell, the discolored mist, the panicked shouts of gas, gas. Early defenses were pathetically inadequate, urine-soaked cloths pressed to faces, but technology evolved rapidly. By 1917, soldiers carried sophisticated box respirators with charcoal filters, though wearing these clammy rubber masks was its own torment. Gas sentries watched wind vanes constantly, always ready to sound alarms at the first warning. Men practiced donning masks in under 6 seconds, fully aware that any hesitation meant an agonizing death. The psychological impact honestly outlasted the physical threat. Veterans flinched at morning mists and industrial smoke for decades afterward. Mental survival, coping with the unendurable, became just as important as any other skill out there. The mind, more often than not, broke before the body in the trenches. Shell shock, what we now understand as PTSD, manifested in trembling, paralysis, and psychological collapse from relentless bombardment and horror. It was, a silent wound that haunted so many long after the guns fell silent. Soldiers created structure to combat chaos. Stand to, at dawn and dusk, inspections, maintenance routines that imposed order on the disorder. The rotation system proved essential. Men spent 4 days in frontline trenches before rotating to support positions and eventually reserve areas for genuine rest. During lulls, they found escape through writing letters home, maintaining that crucial connection to a world beyond the mud. It was, honestly, these small routines and connections that helped them endure. They crafted trench art from shell casings and scrap metal, transforming instruments of death into beauty. Some produced satirical newspapers like the Wipers Times, using humor as armor against despair. But the greatest survival tool was camaraderie. The bonds forged in shared suffering created brotherhood stronger than blood, where men would endure anything for their mates beside them. Conclusion. Lessons in resilience. The soldiers of World War I's trenches survived conditions we can barely imagine from our comfortable present. They adapted to an environment designed to destroy them, finding ingenious solutions to impossible problems and discovering reserves of endurance they never knew they possessed. Their survival wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, and communal. Understanding how they endured reminds us that human resilience, when coupled with ingenuity and mutual support, can overcome even the most brutal circumstances. These men didn't just survive, they maintained their humanity in inhumane conditions. If you found this deep dive into trench warfare survival compelling, honor these soldiers' memories by sharing this knowledge. Hit that like button, subscribe to The Survival Historian, and join us as we continue exploring the intersection of history and human endurance. Until next time, remember, understanding how our ancestors survived helps us appreciate our present and prepare for our future.